Hey there, language lovers. If you've ever written or read something in English, you know that American, British, and Australian English can be, well, a bit different. Whether you're an English learner or just curious about the differences, let's break down why this can be confusing. After winning their independence from Britain, Americans used language as a way to create their own identity. This led to many variations in spelling and punctuation, among other things. Australia also developed its own written conventions, which lie somewhere between those of the US and the UK. One of the most noticeable differences is the spelling. For example, color becomes color in American English, and center becomes center. This change started with a desire for simplification by Noah Webster in the 19th century. Punctuation is another tricky area. In the US, double quotation marks are typically used for direct quotes, whereas the UK prefers single quotation marks. Full stops and commas in the US go inside the quotation marks, no matter what. The way dates are written is different too. In the US, it's month day year, whereas in the UK, it's day month year. Verb forms also differ sometimes between American and British English. The most common examples are with past tense and past participles. These differences come from historical language evolution. Some abbreviations vary between the two as well. For example, apartment is abbreviated as apt in the US, while flat is often abbreviated as FL in the UK. Additionally, the US tends to favor acronyms more. Even though there are many differences, the most important thing is consistency. If you're writing in one form of English, stick to it throughout your document, whether that's in spelling, punctuation, or verb forms. Language evolves in different ways in different parts of the world. The differences between American and British English started hundreds of years ago and continued to evolve separately. No one form of English is better than the other, they developed independently. Let's dive deeper into the differences between UK and US English across several categories. The most obvious spelling differences are the use of OU in British English versus OR in American English. British English uses re in some words, while American English uses er. This change was popularized by Noah Webster's reforms to make spellings more phonetic. While both I's and I's are technically acceptable in British English, British writers tend to use I's more often. However, American English strictly uses I's. British English often uses CE in words, while American English uses say. The origin of these differences traces back to historical spelling conventions that were modified in the US. In some verbs, British English doubles the L in words when conjugated, but American English uses a single L. For example, traveling in British English becomes traveling in American English. British English uses og for some words, while American English simplifies this to og. For example, catalog in British English becomes catalog in American English. Other spelling differences include Czech versus Czech, tire versus tire, and aluminium versus aluminum. These differences are often due to historical spelling reforms. British English typically uses single quotation marks for direct speech or quotations, while American English favors double quotation marks. Additionally, American English places commas and periods inside the quotation marks, regardless of the context. British English tends to use the present perfect tense to describe actions that have relevance to the present, while American English may use the simple past. This implies that the loss of keys has relevance right now. American English uses the subjunctive form of verbs more often than British English, especially in hypothetical or wishful statements. For example, if I were you, I would go to the doctor. In British English becomes, if I was you, I would go to the doctor. In American English. In British English, collective nouns are often treated as plural, using plural verbs and pronouns. In American English, collective nouns are usually singular. For example, the team are playing well today. In British English becomes, the team is playing well today. In American English. Here are some common examples of words that differ between British and American English. For instance, biscuit, in British English is cookie, in American English, and lorry, in British English is truck, in American English. Pronunciation can vary significantly between British and American English, even for words that are spelled the same. For example, schedule, in British English is pronounced schedule, while in American English, it's schedule. Let's explore some other notable differences between British and American English. For instance, British English uses at the weekend, while American English says on the weekend. Similarly, British English prefers have got for possession, whereas American English simply uses have. These differences have evolved over hundreds of years, influenced by factors like regional language development, cultural distinctions, and language reforms. Both forms of English are perfectly valid, and much of the variation comes down to historical preference and evolution. Sure, let's dive even deeper into some other fascinating differences between UK and US English, looking at more vocabulary, grammar rules, punctuation, and common phrases. This will give a more complete picture of how these two versions of English differ. Many everyday items and concepts have completely different names in UK English and US English. For example, a biscuit in British English is a cookie in American English, and a boot in British English is a trunk in American English. When it comes to clothing and fashion, British and American English also have their differences. For instance, a jumper in British English is a sweater in American English, and trousers in British English are pants in American English. Food and drink terminology can vary significantly between British and American English. For example, chips in British English are French fries in American English, and crisps in British English are potato chips in American English. British and American English often use different phrases and expressions to describe the same thing. For example, ring up in British English means call in American English, and give up in British English means quit in American English. Expressions and slang can be quite different between British and American English. For instance, fancy a pint in British English means want a beer in American English, and I'm knackered in British English means I'm exhausted in American English. There are also more complex grammar differences between British and American English. British English tends to use the present perfect for recent actions, while American English often uses the past simple. Additionally, prepositions like at, on, and in are used differently in both versions. British English often uses shall for offers, suggestions, or formal statements, while American English prefers will. For example, I shall return later in British English becomes I will return later in American English. The language you use in both British English and American English also reflects cultural distinctions. British English tends to use please and thank you more frequently, especially in formal situations, whereas American English might be more direct. British English is often more indirect, using phrases that soften requests or statements. For example, "Would you mind if I borrowed your pen?" in British English becomes, "Can I borrow your pen?" in American English. British English tends to retain more formality in language, especially in writing, compared to American English. For instance, "I would be grateful if you could send me the report by Tuesday," in British English becomes, "Please send me the report by Tuesday," in American English. There are also punctuation differences between British and American English. British English typically does not use the Oxford comma, while American English prefers it for clarity. Additionally, abbreviations like Dr. or Mr. in British English do not use a period, whereas they do in American English. Let's add Australian English to the mix and explore how it compares with both British and American English. While Australian English shares many similarities with British English, there are also unique aspects that make it distinct. Australian English uses "are" in words like colour and honour, similar to British English. It also uses "re" in words like centre and theatre, again following British spelling conventions. Australian English tends to use "eyes" rather than "eyes", although both forms are accepted. For example, realise in Australian English is realise in American English. Additionally, CE is used for words like defence and licence in Australian English. Australian English has its own unique vocabulary, influenced by British English, American English, and local culture. For example, thongs in Australian English are flip-flops in British English, and chook in Australian English is chicken in British English. Australia is known for its distinct slang and colloquial expressions. For instance, arvo means afternoon, and servo means gas station. These terms are commonly used in casual conversations and have even made their way into global pop culture. Australian English has a distinctive accent, which can vary significantly depending on the region. For example, the "I" in words like fish is pronounced more like the "E" in flesh. Australians also tend to drop the "R" at the end of words when they don't follow a vowel. Australian English follows British grammar patterns but can sometimes reflect American influences. For example, "at the weekend" is used in Australian English, similar to British English, whereas American English uses "on the weekend." Additionally, Australian English often avoids the subjunctive mood in sentences. Punctuation in Australian English follows most of the rules of British English, with occasional influences from American English in informal writing. For example, Australian English prefers single quotation marks for speech and quotations, just like British English. Additionally, the Oxford comma is often omitted in Australian English, unlike American English where it is commonly used. Australian English is shaped not only by British English but also by indigenous languages, American English, and regional accents. Over time, Australian English has developed its own cultural identity, especially in terms of slang and informal expressions. For instance, strine is a term used to describe a distinctly Australian accent and manner of speaking. Many words or expressions are unique to Australia or are used in specific ways, such as fair dinkum, meaning genuine or true, no worries, meaning everything is fine, and mate, meaning friend. Here are a few common Australian English phrases you may hear frequently. How's it going? Means, how are you? She'll be right. Means, everything will be fine, no worries. Means, it's okay. Don't worry about it, fair dinkum. Means, honest or genuine. Give it a whirl. Means, try something, and good on ya. Means, well done.